Welcome to Crossing Faiths. Today we have a wonderful guest, Ms. Despina Namwembe from Uganda, who is a social scientist, has a master's in peace and conflict studies, and coordinates over 70 grassroots interfaith organizations in the Great Lakes region of Africa. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it.
It's so nice to be here.
These are the recordings that I love, because this is your boots on the ground in Africa, coordinating multiple organizations, working with multiple governments, and a lot of times the issues that Africa and Africans have to deal with are defined by the outside, but you're dealing with the inside. This is a ground up, and the priorities that you deal with are profound and impactful for the community. So maybe we just take a step into this from a perspective of, you work for, or you're associated with the United Religions Initiative, URI,
Yeah.
and then you have an organization. Tell us a little bit about your organization and how it works with URI to engage and enhance the programming within Africa.
So yeah, like you said, I'm called Despina Namwembe, and I'm the regional coordinator for the United Religions Initiative in the Great Lakes countries of Africa. The Great Lakes countries of Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, DR Congo, South Sudan. Did I say Tanzania there? Then also recent Central African Republic. So those are the countries that I'm responsible for. And actually, the organization I work for, I'm one of the global staff for URI. URI is a global or grassroots network organization. It has a global support office in San Francisco. The local chapter here in the Great Lakes countries is an affiliate of the global URI in San Francisco. So I'm one of their global staff persons based here in Kampala, Uganda. And the local chapter here takes care of the membership organizations, because the members of URI are either individual members or organizations, grassroots organizations. So it's a network organization. And we have what we call regional centers. And one of the regional centers for the countries I mentioned is here in Kampala, which we call United Religions Initiative Great Lakes, a subsection. You will see United Religions Initiative Europe. Right. Then there is URI North America, like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you have this, what a large, it was such a massive area that you're responsible for. And yeah. A core part is sort of engagement of faith and non-faith communities. And what are your priorities right now, sort of at the regional level in the Great Lakes region? What's the conversations that you have about?
Yeah, so the countries that I've mentioned are actually in the Great Lakes, part of kind of like what you see, Horn of Africa, Great Lakes, and maybe a bit of West Africa, are violent-prone countries. Right. There is always something happening that is where violence is coming up. Either it is electoral related, or it is a governance issue, a justice issue. It is an issue about identity and all those things. So this is the region where at least one country is at war, or two countries are fighting over something. And so what is mainly on my mind and the people that I work with is the prevention of violence, to ensure that local communities live in peace, coexist in peace, because the violence is either ideological or religious extremism, or political extremism, or identity extremism. And all these ones cause bodily harm, and we've seen so many lives get lost. But then there are also initiatives that we work with the membership to ensure that we prevent such violence, and we use the local methods and the local resources to ensure that we stop such violence. And also there are initiatives around environmental protection, and we use spiritual efforts, indigenous knowledge, where we integrate indigenous knowledge into environmental strategies. For example, because the indigenous spiritualities that you are members of URI, or United Religions Initiative, they integrate their spiritual strategies into ensuring that the environment thrives. They use, like, for example, if they are trying to do medicinal, they want to do a medicinal campaign, then they will plant trees that have a dual kind of supportive mechanism. That when the West was, so many people were dying of COVID, but you'll be surprised that in Africa it was less. And what were we using? We're using such a mixture of different herbs. And the indigenous communities were at the center of ensuring that people use those herbs. Either they are steaming themselves or they are taking the cocktails. And we didn't die in those massive numbers. So the environment factor was one of those things on my mind. Engaging young people, because so many countries in this region, majority of their population are young people to a tune of like 75%. So engaging them to ensure that they live productive lives, and the same as engaging women, same way.
Well, so some of the gender programming that you have is, and as an expert in gender and women's empowerment and gender programming, what are some of the programming that focuses on the gender specific elements that your programming with multi-faith communities enhances? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah. So the thing is that incidentally, some of our faith communities don't have strong gender balance interests, because doctrines kind of put a woman at a lower level in terms of participation and access to economic opportunities. So what we do is to engage, use interfaith strategies, because URI has what it calls a charter, and that charter has principles. And one of the principles, which is Principle 8, says that we should have equal participation of both men and women in the works of URI. And that means that it's not about rhetoric, it's not about talking, but we use social action. And when we do social action, we are looking at where are the women unjustly treated. And by doing that, we ensure that women also have a space at the table. And for example, in some of the programming, we had a community where cultural stereotypes and religious stereotypes were denying women to own property. And yet the Supreme Law was like, women have equal access to property. It has nothing to do with, men only. And what we did was to ensure that we use religious texts. And some of these were from the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, and all these other texts. And the religious actors were the ones who were speaking positively to these teachings, and ensuring that the men listen and know that women can also be equal partners in property management and ownership. So the fact that some use maybe one verse to ensure that women don't prevail, that is what we try to say. Look, there are other areas which you can use positive.
So is religious different, like in the Great Lakes region, religious differences, is it is reconciliation between religions or faith groups and cooperation the priority, or are faith groups collaborating and cooperating already? I mean, a lot of people don't know the diversity or it's always, you know, Christian and Muslim, or, you know, and is it more tribal? Is it what are the key drivers of conflict between peoples? And is faith a factor, or is faith more of a tool to reconcile with conflict?
So it is two ways. Sometimes it depends. When there is opportunity,
right.
When there are opportunities, and others are not getting, then the faith card comes in. Of course, Abrahamic religions, like how you can see Christian, Muslims, and Jews, those ones are like, you know, always at the table. But then there are minority faiths, which are usually not even spoken about. And the discrimination from by these Abrahamic faiths towards the African traditionalists, that one is even worse, incidentally, and yet we are in Africa. So we feel that, for example, when we do the environment efforts, you would see that the indigenous African traditionalists have more knowledge of the medicinal opportunities that come with certain trees or herbs and all that kind of stuff. Sure. But then the stigmatization of these traditions kind of puts them on the side. But like you're saying, it is not sometimes necessarily the main problem, but it is used for anybody. If it is a political agenda, they would ride on the sentiments of religion for reasons which you already probably and any other person knows. That religion is very strong. It's a conviction. So once somebody uses that, they can easily get what they want.
What strategies do you use to like engage? I mean, the Great Lakes region is so massive, and like you're talking about these indigenous populations, there's tribal populations, right? And then there's sort of colonial, neo-colonial populations. Then you have these Abrahamic faiths, and it's all, you know, there's a hodgepodge, right? There's a lot of different peoples, a lot of different beliefs, and alliances, allegiances to politics. How do you conduct your engagement in a thoughtful manner to bring people into the URI community?
How do I collaborate? How do I collaborate?
How do you conduct engagement if you're going into trying to bring people into the URI community with all these differences?
So sometimes it depends on what we are doing. So what social action we are doing, because you know URI is not like we do things same way, and that's the goodness. People who are in Afghanistan, they are doing their own things, and people who are in Argentina, they are also doing their own stuff, and in Africa. It's not, we are not so much into the hierarchy, but we are so much into connectivity. So the more we connect to learn, we connect to strengthen one another, we connect to build a relationship and build bridges. And we are not necessarily connecting to create a hierarchy of the boss is here and the boss is there. So when we come together to do social action, and then people see, look, I would like to be a part of this. And I would like to be a party or how, because sometimes they are seeing voices which are often not heard being put at the table. And not necessarily that we are saying, oh, because you're majority here, so you should have the day. And you are right, it's about the voices which are usually not heard being at the table. And then somebody's like, oh, I would love to have something like this. And also the fact that the discrimination element is not is not welcome in the URI. And this is not about the rhetoric of talking about it, but it is exhibited in the way we do work and how we associate with one another. You will be surprised in one of our assemblies that you'll hear all sorts of accents. And then you're listening to all these accents, but they are all given space to speak and say what and speak how they feel and share in their own way. Sometimes it may not necessarily be like you agree, but it's just to have them to have a safe space to express themselves. That's how it works. So when people see that, some of them will be like, I would like to be a part of this and I would like to contribute to peace. by using the principles that you have as an organization for me to build peace within the communities where I am.
It's an interesting model. I spoke and worked with people from URI, and I just spoke with Eric Rowe just recently about Europe, and he's, dealing with all kinds of issues in Europe, and it's not different in the sense that you have multiple peoples with multiple priorities, franchised and disenfranchised in Europe, and he's wrestling with all of that. And we were chatting back and forth about that earlier, and so I understand the similarities, but there's a lot of really interesting opportunities in Africa when it comes to local resource management and engagement of communities to help with protection against violence and discrimination. What are the priorities right now within the Great Lakes region that you would define that the world it may or may not be aware of, because we're so removed? And right now we're under the backdrop of UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly is happening, and all people get is what's on the news. But from the Great Lakes region, if you were going to say these are our top priorities, this is what the things that we're dealing with, what are they?
So the thing is that there is a lot of killings that happen behind the cameras in these regions, that people get killed even for the resources that they have. Right. That they have the minerals, that they have all these other things, and there is fighting and a lot of weapons crossing over, and the cameras maybe are interested in Palestine and Israel, and they will not capture there's so many refugees that are overpowering in other countries. Like, for example, Uganda, where I am, the refugees that are coming in from the DR Congo are just enormous. But the cameras don't capture that, but the fighting that is going on a daily. And they're using different things, from religious to political to identity, to ensure that they use those extremist ideologies, but also to get close to the resources, the minerals that is happening in the DR Congo. Same was with the South Sudan. And now this Uganda, we have oil. So anything can happen because there are interests, vast interests. But because the cameras are not here, the international cameras are not here to show any of that, then nobody will know that that is happening. And I see children who are being recruited into these rebel activities, and women. Some of these women are lied to that they are being taken to get jobs in these places. And when they reach there with their children, they are turned into a fighting militia. And the children have to grow up in those jungles so that they become the fighters. Even when the army rescues such children, when they come outside of the rebel activity, the rebels are insisting on that those children have to go back. Children are forced to kill their own children if they don't comply with the turning into. Even yesterday, I had some here women who came that we are taking care of, who hears such stories of women. She had to kill her own child by hitting her on a tree trunk so that they hardened her soul to be a soldier. And she was here. She was rescued by the army, because sometimes I work with the security organization organs. So they brought her for counseling with our team, because we do psychosocial support for such groups of women who have been rescued in rebel activity. And she's like, I am living for nothing. My other children are dead. And this one, the first one, which was crying constantly, they told me to hit her head on a tree trunk. If I had refused, my other children would have died and me slaughtered. So, I mean, the stories of such women and people rescued from such captivity, and also the stories of the refugees who are on a daily, whether Congolese or Ugandans or Rwandese living in DR Congo, who come to this country. When you listen to those stories, you could see a lot of despair in their lives. You're seeing children who have no idea where they will go to school next, where they will have something to eat now that the United Nations, the USAID cut off the funding for refugees. They have no next meal, not until maybe a good person can support them somehow. But then the war is not their own making. The interests in the minerals in their area are not even local. The interests are so global that they will fuel, because who makes the F47 guns? Is it in the DRI Congo, in that village? No, they are coming from somewhere. There are people who are bringing in those ammunitions and guns, and they are making these people to be displaced, and then they go out there and they are suffering and they have nothing to eat. So that we are listening to all those stories on a daily, because they are coming to these offices for support, which support is also cut off, because the international funding community is no longer interested in any of those stories. They are not interested in who is struggling where. This is how we've turned ourselves into an empathetic population that doesn't care about what is happening elsewhere, so long as I have put on the table. We are no longer this connected community of people which is humane. And here we call it Ubuntu. The Ubuntu spirit is like dead and gone. And we want to revive that. In URI, we want to revive that spirit, so that the connection, the suffering of somebody far away from you has a connection to you. Because at some point, it can be you in the same situation.
Yeah, no, I first of all, I appreciate you sharing all that. I mean, I think the reality is that when you're this far away, and part of the reason why we reached out is so that you could share the realities of how these global issues are affecting the local communities there. And then from there, it's like, there are other people that there are agendas that are sort of defining what's going on in Africa. And I always, I spent a lot of time just doing work, and it's, you have your sort of if you're a francophile country, for example, right, and you have your sort of French name, you have your local name, you can only buy French products. It's like, so there's essentially an embargo, of only French products. You can only have a French education, which is not transferable, and so the breaking from just the mechanisms where you have access and where you have these reliance on these global neocolonial mechanisms is difficult. Especially, it's difficult when they're in place, but then when they don't exist, or when development funds are drying up, for example, with USAID, we're sitting on the global level talking about Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine, and these are the hot point issues, and I don't say no one, but the priorities of Central South West Africa aren't really being talked about, and yet it's a key player in the global economy because of minerals. It's a key player in the global economy because of all these other things. So there is that still connectivity there. But then you have the human element that you're talking about that's so important. None of this gets done without local communities collaborating and conflict not being there, so that they could be part of the global community and global supply chain, which is a good thing. But the local community has to have agency. They have to be able to put food on the table so that they can provide for their not only the local community but larger community, to provide and have a stake in the local, regional, and global economy. And so it's disheartening. I mean, just this, like the story you're telling me, it's heartbreaking. And what organizations, I guess, at this point, I mean, if you were the list of needs, if you could, because we have a global listenership, I won't go down to DC, I'll be in New York. What's the list of things? Like, what if you're going to turn around and say, okay, right now, I mean, they've just told this terrible story, right, about this young lady and her children. What is needed at the local level to help to start to foment positive change for the communities in the Great Lakes region? And it could be multiple things, but what are the asks? What is it that you need right now that communities and individuals can help with? I know, in addition to attention.
Yeah. So, like you're saying, the need is both grassroots but also policy. And policy also at the different level. I could start with the policy. That is governments working together, and even to the level of the African Union, to understand that this is a serious war that is claiming lives on a daily. Those of us who work with such people on a daily, it is just mind blowing that you on a daily you're receiving all the sad stories. That at some point you also have to go and sit somewhere and try to regain your sanity, because those stories also come with graphic photos of who were killed where, of who killed who, and in which numbers. So the governments need to get their act together. They need to have it as a priority in terms of policy around minerals or around governance issues. They need to really sit at the table and discuss that. At the lower level, the people, especially women, children, and young people, they need support. There is immediate support. That is in terms of how do we support the refugee community? We have membership that is working with the refugees in those areas. How do we give them the intermediate support that they need to survive first? And then also, how do we support them for their children to be able to be in school so that we don't raise a generation of uninformed, illiterate kids that have no idea what to do. And one thing I've seen with the women, some of the women that we've worked with, you could see that once they have a small business, we usually give them like $100, $100 or $150, and they start a small business. So they are educating the children themselves. We don't have now to go ahead and continue paying school fees because it is for eternity. But
Right.
this we give them startup, but we first take them through a skills development in terms of entrepreneurial skills so that they know how to use money. And then after taking them through that, then they start the small businesses. And then those small business, they build them into ensuring that their children are in school. The one thing about women that I like is that women will always stand in for their family. For women, it is family first. Uh, Not only even the children, but even their husbands, children, incapable, everybody, they will be able to support everybody in the family. So every time we are supporting the women with these small businesses, we've seen that more children are attaining school. But also we don't have many of those that we've started with, but we have at least a good number that we can show that we started with this number. Now these are the number of children who are in school. Those are key, but also they need psychosocial. Now, the woman who hit the kid on the tree trunk and came back and is supposed to go and reintegrate just within the community with no proper rehabilitation, they need to go through a series of rehabilitation measures for them to be psychologically sane. Otherwise, we've seen a lot of recidivism happening, especially for the young people. And some of the women, because they don't fit in where they are so used to the other life that they will feel like they have to go back. At least the ones that we've been able to conduct rehabilitation, that have gone through our rehabilitation process, you could see that they are now stable and they can live on their own and provide for the families that they have now. And those who didn't go through that, they're still traumatized at night. They are waking up with all these other nightmares that they don't lead a stable life. And those can easily be taken back because anybody who is doing recruitment will play on all the vulnerabilities that they are in. And those are the women who can easily be taken back, or the young people who can be taken back. So we want a situation for immediate support, intermediate support, and also kind of policy frameworks that can help communities and governments to work together and be able to solve this issue. Otherwise, the greed that goes on is making people lose lives unnecessarily. Of course, there is no necessary losing of life, but again, this is too much. Yeah.
No, well, I think I mean these are tangible things. I mean, you're saying $100 to start a business and help with entrepreneurship. That's not a lot, in the global scheme of things, And then, but the psychological journey that individuals have to make, that's profound and can take time. I think that these two major issues, coupled with the larger sort of policy issue, I mean, I think that some of these things need to be brought to the forefront, and what we'll do is we'll definitely put some links in the podcast recording and so forth. I think that the backdrop of UNGA right now with the UN General Assembly, it's just overshadowed by these events that are taking priority, but the ongoing events that are happening in your region are profound and real. And I think that there's an opportunity from the multi-faith community to participate through your organization to help and mitigate what's going on. I mean, I appreciate you taking the time to share these elements. It means a lot, and I think that what we'll do is we'll have a follow-up to talk about what's going on in the region, and how further collaboration could really be a force multiplier in what you do.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, at the end of the day, like, I'm not the proponent of like, okay, we give each household the $100 to do that small business. But I'm the person who looks at the person holistically. Like I told you, it has to go with the psychosocial, more
right.
psychosocial support, moving that person from that to, and the faith actors are really good at this because they do counseling. We kind of ask them, which one are you comfortable with? Are
Right.
you comfortable with somebody from your own faith tradition? Surprisingly, some are not. That's the funny bit. Some
Yeah.
are not. They will tell you, I would rather speak to the other, and it is the opposite. And
Mm,
you'll be, what? Really? That one? He said, yeah, I like that one because he's a guy of integrity. And
yeah.
I will be like, oh, but you are this Christian. And I was like, no, I like Sheikh something. And yeah, then I'm comfortable with that Sheikh. He was there for me during blah, 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 blah. And I know he would do, but you're mad. Yes, I am. But I like Sheikh something. And then another one would be Muhammad, and would be I like a bishop something, or I like a reverend something.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, some of them not even like the actual religious leaders, but they would like somebody or an opinion leader or somebody of credibility within a certain community. So when we are choosing and selecting this cohort team that attends to the psychological issues of these people, we are not even necessarily looking at what big hierarchy you have,
Sure.
but credibility, integrity, people who can, when they tell them their issues, they are not going to go around and they're, talking to them and telling everybody. And this has helped. We see somebody coming down slowly, coming down and starting to believe in a second chance in life.
Yeah.
It takes time, like you said. There was a program we had to run for 3 years before we
Right.
actually got something out of it. 3 years. The beginning wasn't easy. They would see me, they didn't want to sit with me, they didn't want, but now they hug me, they know these kind of things. And they were so distant, seated that way. You are talking like you're talking to a rock,
Right.
a real rock. But then later I just became empathetic and I was looking at, in my head, I'm like, if I was the one doing the things they're telling me, they've killed somebody there, they're forcing you to take their brain, like leak the brain of that person if you want to leave. The vivid, and the women, they first say, can we go in a corner and I can undress for you? And you go into a separate room. because I have male staff here, male staff. So you go into a room and he will show you the beatings, the marks of the beatings and the scars and everything. And you're looking at these things. So you also start saying, I understand where they are coming from. So even when you're implementing, you're not implementing anything that is like, okay, maybe we are planting food security or something. This is real life. This is something, somebody's life went through something. So when you're preventing violence of that nature, for this person not to go into that violent kind of lifestyle, you're not using the normal rhetoric, but
Right.
you're trying to empathize and look humanely into this situation. And then you put yourself into the shoes of this person, then you journey with this person from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
And it is sometimes exhausting, but when you see the lives that have turned around, then you feel good.
Yeah, it takes time. I travel with an Antiochian priest, like, so he's Eastern Orthodox priest, and who's a counselor, and both of us are, we're he's a priest.
I'm Orthodox, by the way.
Oh, you are? Okay. So he's the Antiochian, and I'm Ismaili, which, and then I'm I'm a faith leader in my own community, and so we would go and post ISIS, Iraq and Syria and so forth, and deal with very similar situations where, you have these taglines of food security and agency and development initiatives, but none of that matters when you're dealing with victimhood and trying to get to a point where we can get past shame, we can get past trauma, we can get past, and all that stuff takes time, and it's difficult for policy people. It's very, very difficult for development people. It's very, very difficult because they all look in terms of cost benefit analysis and ROI, return on investment, and so
numbers
yeah,
number this, number that. And sometimes you're like, you know what, even one turned around is a good person. We've achieved to get two people who were in this bad shape and now they're in this good shape. And the ripple effect of these people can be so bigger in that they will be the ones telling the others how good they've gone through that. They become your ambassadors. But like you're saying, the verification mechanisms of how we do work is big numbers.
Yeah, it always has to be something that you can justify, right? And so I remember being in Syria with Father John, and it's the two of us, and we're trying to do this, and they're like, how long is this going to take? And I go, it takes as long as it's going to take. It just is what it is. But and a lot of times we'd have Christians talking to me, right, and we'd have Muslims talking to him, and a lot of it has to do with authority or being outside of the community, because you're not going to be able to start stuff, and but then there's this other components of sort of a fresh perspective with someone they could trust that's theirs, right? So you become that person for them, and that becomes the catalyst where you start building trust, and saving a life. It's very weird, because when it comes to ROI and it comes to cost benefit, you're trying to talk about saving a life to justify funding, and it can get hairy. But the reality is that this is, these are the things that show that have dignity for each other, and we also we want to make sure that individuals have the ability to have agency, to have to live a life, and to get above just survival, and all these other things, the things they're talking about at UNGA now, Millennium Development Goals, they're talking about all those things, but they and all that stuff's fun, great, it's meaningful, but when it comes to translating to people that need to put food on the table and need to be able to look at themselves in the mirror to perform and take care of their families, or restart a family or restart a life, they don't really translate. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to reach out, is that there's such a, the URI does amazing work. You're on the ground, and you're in a region where not only is the work necessary, but there's a profound element in having that, in getting your voice to our listenership and to the larger community, so they say,
Yeah.
this is right. We need to kind of, there's a disconnect here, and that disconnect means that we need to kind of thoughtfully engage these communities and support good work that's being done. And there may not be ROI immediately. There may not be a cost benefit immediately, from an accounting standing, but from a social, spiritual, emotional, and what we would call social worth, it's probably the most valuable thing we can do.
Yeah.
So
I mean, at the end of the day, it's not always about gains and money and all these kind of things. It's about the story being heard somewhere, and people really acting on it, in terms of even speaking against it. I've seen situations where people use their time to change a situation, by saying no in their own terms, in their own way, and something happens, something positive happens, because there is that voice that is cutting across and is saying no to something that is happening somewhere. It doesn't have to be like all the money or throw the money here. It is sometimes some of those gestures that can help a situation turn positive from the vulnerability that it has to something good, where people are empowered, and now they don't have. You see, the moment there is no war, the moment the people are peaceful, people will fend for themselves. They will find a way to survive. Africa has never been like they can't feed themselves or they can't do these things. If only they were peaceful. I've seen people who really survive on little, but so long as they are peaceful. The moment war comes in, displacements happen, then it is so hard for anybody to even fend for themselves. People are coming in on a daily. And I think Uganda is like the second refugee country in the world, or third, something like that. It doesn't go to fourth, but it should be three and below, of a country that welcomes refugees in here. We have like refugees from literally every country around us, and even be like as far as Ethiopia and all these other countries. But the ones from the DR, and all these people come in not because of anything, but because of instability.
yeah,
Because of instability, and also we have our own challenges. I can't say we are this very peaceful. Usually when we go into elections, this country becomes not the best, and we are going into one in January. So today they were nominating presidents, but already we know the tensions are high, everything is high, and we know that where people are coming in, that is where now the tension is simmering because of the electoral processes. So the whole idea is that, how do we make these places peaceful? We don't supply more guns. The more we supply more guns, the more we are encouraging the killing and the fighting and all these, macho kind of ego-centric kind of lifestyle by those who are interested in violence.
yeah. No, it's there's, I think that we've got, everything's cyclical, right? So you have the elections are coming, so now you have a wellspring of individuals and discourse, which is good in the sense that you want to have open discussions, but then once you bring that element of weapons, guns, instability, it creates, it can be a runaway train, and that could be a problem. And so but I think that the work that URI is doing, and certainly the work that you're doing, is profound. And I'm overjoyed that we were able to have this conversation. I know we're at the top of the hour and you have another meeting, so I want to be sensitive to that.
Yes.
But we can do a follow-up, and
Yeah, please.
I'm really, I was just
You just
overjoyed.
now you have my email. You just let me know, and we can have I couldn't cut this short because they wanted me to speak in the next one, and
Right.
yet I wanted also to speak in this one, and but we can have a day when we are relaxed, like we are not running around, and then we have this. So I will be happy. You will mention some dates, and I will be willing to have another conversation.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Despina.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So long.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.